Ladies and gentlemen, I call to order the fifth meeting of the 14th session of the Committee on Science and Technology. I now invite the committee to turn to agenda item 3, interfacing science and policy and sharing knowledge, sub-item 3A, entitled The Science Policy Interface, the UNCCD Knowledge Hub, and the Analysis, Dissemination, and Accessibility of Best Practice. I would like first to give the floor to the UNCCD Secretariat to introduce sub-item 3A, for which you have before you document ICCD-COP14/CST/5. Mr. Baron Orr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This document provides a report on the overall modalities of the science policy interface of the UNCCD, on the renewal of SPI membership, as well as on the further development of the UNCCD Knowledge Hub and the accessibility of best practices on sustainable land management. It also contains suggestions on improving the knowledge base on SLM technologies and approaches through alignment with their contribution to the other Rio conventions. The report on the practices and working modalities for the SPI in 2018 and 2019 can be found in Chapter 2 of this document, while the annex provides an extensive overview of the scientific publications that were published resulting from the work of the SPI. Part 3 of this document provides an overview of the development of the UNCCD Knowledge Hub, including the recent integration of the UNCCD-led Drought Toolbox. The UNCCD Knowledge Hub was developed as a platform to fulfill the knowledge needs of all UNCCD stakeholders. It has been continuously further developed to incorporate the work of the SPI, as well as from a broad range of other sources in an integrated way. The UNCCD-led Drought Toolbox was developed as part of the Knowledge Hub in close cooperation with a group of partner organizations. The Drought Toolbox provides easy access to tools, best practices, methods, evidence, data sets, and knowledge that countries can deploy to mitigate the impacts of drought, to implement monitoring and early warning systems, or to perform a drought risk assessment. Some of these tools are provided by partners, while others have been developed specifically for the Drought Toolbox in collaboration among the partners. The Drought Toolbox is already available on the Knowledge Hub and will be officially launched at the Drought Day event next week. Chapter 4 of this document provides an overview of the cooperation between the UNCCD and the World Overview of Conservation Approaches and Technologies, or WOCOT, and the availability of best practices on SLM. This chapter also addresses the relationship between SLM and emerging concepts of ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solutions employed in the other Rio conventions. Finally, this document outlines some recommendations regarding, inter alia, the SPI renewal procedures, the further development of the Knowledge Hub, and the alignment of knowledge regarding SLM with the other Rio conventions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Orr. I now give the floor to Mr. Van Dalen of the UNCCD Secretariat to make a presentation on the UNCCD Knowledge Hub. Mr. Van Dalen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wanted to show just a few things from the UNCCD Knowledge Hub in relation to this agenda item. As you can see, document CST5 contains 3 separate topics, but I would like to focus my presentation on the Knowledge Hub, where I can also show a little bit of the drought toolbox that was recently added there, and address the topics of best practices in cooperation with the World Overview of Conservation Approaches and Technologies, WOCAT. Following various COP decisions, as well as in line with the 10-year strategic plan, the Secretariat had developed a scientific knowledge brokering platform, SKBP, which was launched as a pilot in 2014. Based on experiences in the pilot, as well as feedback from various partners, the SKBP was rebranded into the UNCCD Knowledge Hub, which was launched in 2016, in line with the renewed UNCCD website. As such, the UNCCD Knowledge Hub was expanded with the aim to provide the background information and scientific foundation to the main messages on the UNCCD website, and thus form an integral part of the UNCCD efforts to make relevant science accessible to policymakers. Also, the Knowledge Hub aims to promote the exchange of information and knowledge between country parties to the UNCCD, with the focus of the exchange on best practices, specifically on SLM. In collaboration with various partners and the SPI, the Knowledge Hub is constantly kept up to date. At the moment, the Knowledge Hub is structured around the scientific conceptual framework for LDN, but it also focuses on SLM, capacity building, and knowledge sharing between parties. Some of the outcomes of the most recent work of the SPI have already been incorporated into the Knowledge Hub. This is, for example, the concept of drought-smart land management from the SPI technical report, which is integrated partly in the drought toolbox, but also under the section on SLM. And the decision support trees on LDN for LDN and soil organic carbon are already included in the Knowledge Hub. In the next biennium, we will continue working to ensure that the Knowledge Hub reflects the latest scientific knowledge, as well as the results of the work of the SPI. The section on best practices on sustainable land management provides access to a rich database of SLM knowledge, which is for a large part provided by our partner WOCAT. We provide access there also based on the insights from the SPI reports that was presented here 2 years ago on sustainable land management. Includes examples both from WOCAT as from other sources, but we're using this in an integrated way, using the outcomes of the SPI work, the knowledge developed by the SPI, as well as knowledge from partners like WOCAT, to present this in an integrated way. So when we look at sustainable land management in context, we note that recently land has become very prominent in processes of other Rio conventions, like UNFCCC and CBD. So in reference to the emerging concepts of ecosystem-based adaptation and ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction in the CBD, nature-based solutions in the FCCC, we are proposing in this document to look at SLM in that context as well, and see how we can structure the knowledge base on SLM in a way to align it with the processes in the other conventions. So document CST5 also contains recommendations for this specifically, with the aim to work on putting SLM at the center of all these land-based solutions that we see there. A second part of the Knowledge Hub that I would like to highlight is the drought toolbox. This has been recently developed and implemented in support of the drought initiative. This has been done in close collaboration with the partners listed on the screen here. The Drought Toolbox, like the name says, includes a large number of tools from all the partners involved. By bringing all these tools together into one box, the toolbox aims to provide easy access for any stakeholder involved in the development and implementation of national drought plans. But instead of just offering a large box with a selection of hammers, screwdrivers and other tools, the toolbox also contains a structure that allows the user to make an easier choice about what tools they need in their specific situation. So sometimes you need a hammer out of the toolbox, sometimes you need a screwdriver. So the toolbox is structured in a way that allows people to easily look at which tools actually are available and which tools they would like to be using in specific situations. The structure is for that is based on the DRAMP guidelines that were developed under the Drought Initiative. So that forms the structure, but there's also for every section within the toolbox a question and answer part where users of the toolbox are asked a number of fairly simple questions, which then allows the system to make some suggestions of different tools to consider. So I invite you to explore the Drought Toolbox, and where you will find 3 pillars. Pillar 1 is focusing on monitoring and early warning systems. This pillar offers, of course, lots of tools also developed by WMO, but there's one tool that I want to highlight here, which been specifically developed for the Drought Toolbox between the UNCCD and UN Environment DHI. Which is a tool that provides easy access to a large number of data sets based on remote sensing satellite data that we make easily accessible to everyone. If you go to Pillar 1, you will see that you can access this tool, for which I've shown an example screen here. This is the only part of the toolbox for which you would need to create an account. Everything else is freely accessible and open, but creating an account is free, so it invites everybody to do so and explore the system and the rich set of data that is here. If we go to Pillar 2, Drought Risk Assessment. Again, this offers a number of tools brought together by different partners. One thing that I would like to highlight here, which was specifically developed for this toolbox, is the Drought Risk Assessment, which has been developed by the Joint Research Center of the European Union. This is an updated version, which has only been released recently, which you can find through Pillar 2. This is done as a global assessment, so of course it doesn't necessarily always provide you the amount of detail you need to look into in-country implementation projects, but just to give you an idea of how the JRC has calculated drought risk, this would be a good tool to start and explore the various data sets that they included in there. Pillar 3, Drought Risk Mitigation, provides tools by various partners, including FAO. Of course, drought risk mitigation in the UNCCD-led drought toolbox also include lots of knowledge and information regarding sustainable land management. So what you see here is that also the tools that were already in the Knowledge Hub relating to WOCAT are incorporated in the drought toolbox. And as I mentioned earlier, the outcomes of the SPI report with the new concept of drought smart land management is also included in here. Various tools in here can easily be searched by answering a few simple questions. So visitors are asked specific questions within this pillar, which will help provide a smaller selection of tools for people to consider. So the example you see here is under Pillar 3, are you looking for policy measures or on-the-ground measures? Based on that, there is a selection of tools that's presented to you that you can then consider exploring further. So further development of the drought toolbox is expected to continue under the continued support for the drought initiative, which is presented in the committee as of the whole. But the further development of the Knowledge Hub is something that we would like to bring into the CST. I would very much invite you all to further explore the Knowledge Hub, including the Drought Toolbox and the other tools provided, and I very much welcome your questions and your feedback. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Van Dalen, for this very important presentation. I now open the floor for any questions or comments that you may have on the presentation by the Secretariat. I will take all comments and then give the floor to the Secretariat to respond. Parties wishing to make comments or take the floor are invited to press the button. I see Switzerland. Switzerland, you have the floor.
Chair, can I ask a clarification? Are you asking for questions for the presentation or for the document?
Yes, you can do both. Switzerland, you have the floor. You can do both. You can ask questions, you can make your comments, you can seek clarification. You have the liberty.
Okay, in this case, I will make comments regarding the document UNCCDCOP14INDIA/5. Switzerland thanks and congratulates the SPI for its work and the progress made. Switzerland also noticed with appreciation the progress of the Secretariat with regard to the Knowledge Hub. We equally acknowledge the continuing efforts by the Secretariat and WCAT in promoting the analysis, dissemination, and accessibility of SLM best practices. The WCAT database on technologies and approaches for SLM is by now a valuable asset with which the parties can support action on the ground and which deserves support by parties and donors. Switzerland is of the opinion that based on the assets and the experience gained and documented in the UNCCD WCAT database, the UNCCD now can make important contributions to all the Rio Conventions and supports the view that SLM is a strategic component for the implementation of all the three conventions. With continuing climate change, the need for water resource management and disaster reduction becomes increasingly more important. SLM can play an important role in adapting to these challenges. We support efforts to promote coherence and synergies in documenting best practices in SLM with the other Rio Conventions and relevant partners to ensure alignment in the way ecosystem-based adaptation, eco-DRR, nature-based solutions, and SLMs are categorized and promoted through the UNCC science policy instruments and the UNCC Knowledge Hub. And we encourage the Secretariat to engage in developing concrete ways to document these best practices in a way that serves all the 3 Rio Conventions. Finally, Switzerland encourages and recommends the Secretariat to continue to cooperate with WOCAT in supporting the collection, dissemination and analysis of best practices and the mobilization of resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Switzerland, for your comments. Are there any other delegations that want to make comments? Japan, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I also like to thank the UNCCD Secretariat for the document on this subject. The promotion of the UNCCD Knowledge Hub is considered as one of the very promising measures to promote the effective implementation of UNCCD through the sharing of good practices in respective countries. With regard to the recommendation presented in paragraph 56, or more specifically, subparagraph F, that suggests expansion of the knowledge hub, my delegation would like to state that while we welcome the Secretariat's effort to enlarge the pool of information, it's equally important to understand the needs of the parties and tailor the information in order for the parties to use the information for the purpose of advancing the effective implementation of the convention. The expansion of the knowledge hub needs to be coherent with its objectives and priority. It's important to avoid the duplication of work with other treaty bodies and to be mindful of potential budget increase and available resources. Thank you.
Thank you, Japan. I invite Cambodia. Cambodia, please take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, honorable delegates. I thank you for the presentations by UNCCD expert about the drought toolbox, and I would like to inform the meeting that in Cambodia, together with the government frameworks and initiative on disaster risk management, and especially in efforts to combating drought and land degradation in the countries. We have made a lot of progress in terms of disaster risk management in the country. In most recent time, we work on the new initiatives about the crop and livestock insurance policies in the country. So in these policies, we rely very much on the more and more efficient and accurate information about the drought, especially about the intensity of the drought. I would like to ask your thought about the toolbox. How is it the capability of this toolbox, in providing the informations that can help users, especially working in the providing the statistic on the drought damage assessment and the farmers, how this toolbox can be useful for those users. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you, Cambodia. I give the floor to Morocco.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Indeed, this connection, this interlinkage between the UNCCD and the approach that has been discussed is very important. These, however, complement each other. The tools which are being used are used jointly. I'm talking about WOCAT specifically. And in WOCAT, we see a helpful addition to the fight against desecration of land. A number of countries are using this approach now. In Morocco also, we've been using it. This is a great approach. We also have the local approach, which is very important. We identify good practices, poor practices, adapted practices, and so forth. This all helps us achieve a point where we can focus on goal 30, protecting our soils, and I think that we can invite state parties and different countries to use this technology and to exchange on these technologies. Now we do have a platform for exchanging best practices on the WOCAT website, and I think that we should refer to that website and specifically encourage people to consult that website, because there already are a lot of good practices. Each country can contribute and has contributed their good practices. So I think that this is an excellent approach for sharing our knowledge and know-how on an international scale. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Morocco, for your comments. I now invite Bosnia-Herzegovina to take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Since I'm taking floor first time, I would like to thank the Indian government for warm hospitality and organization of the COP. Also, I have no specific question, but I would like to give just a comment. Thank you, Secretariat, for preparing these documents, very important one. There is a huge improvement in the Knowledge Hub platform, and I think everybody recognizes it, and it would appreciate from many countries, and it will help very much on implementation of LDN. But also I would like to mention that collaboration with different international platforms and institutions like FAO, like WOCAT, has enabled the countries to make better informed decision to combat land degradation, desertification, and drought, and mainstream sustainable land management into policy, finance mechanism, and land use planning process at different level and scale to achieve LDN targets. We are seeking to capitalize on this experience and further strengthen expecting that SLM mainstreaming and scaling up strategy would be implemented in every of our countries. The use of SLM criteria and indicators. Also, we would like to profit it analysis and dissemination of SLM best practice much more wider. And also what we are expecting, the better cooperation between the South-South country regarding SLM experience and practices. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Bosnia-Herzegovina. I now invite Algeria to take the floor.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Chair. At the outset, I'd like to thank the team behind this immense and very important effort. The toolbox that's been put together is extremely useful for all parties, for mitigating the impact of drought and for early warning. However, I have one question about the geospatial data available. I would like to have more information about the nature of that data from space. Thank you.
Thank you, Algeria. I invite Argentina to take the floor.
Gracias, señor presidente.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would also like to thank the Secretariat for the briefing. Argentina would like to congratulate the Secretariat for the past period of hard work under the mandate, a mandate aimed at integrating the WOCAT methodology within the existing platform and the great database of knowledge accumulated under the convention. In addition, we would like to clarify that in acquiring this knowledge in each country, it appears that we are moving forward. We think that the platform should be used more and more broadly at all levels, national and international. We have a great responsibility in that area to ensure a broader promotion of the platform, and we look forward to having more communications tools also. The Secretariat, I think, can help us by providing tools for communication and the dissemination of knowledge under the convention. As regards best practices and as regards how they are selected and also the profile used, the WOCAT system has been very useful for us in Argentina. We would like to report to you that we have worked on a national adaptation of the WOCAT system. We have attempted to simplify the methodology in order to make it more accessible to users. And users indeed of very different levels of knowledge and expertise. We believe that science should be accessible to all, not just the most advanced academic minds, but the general public also. And so we've developed a new and simplified system of symbols derived from the WOCAT system for simple visual interpretation, and we would be happy to share this with your experts. You can find it on Argentina's national website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Argentina. I invite India to take the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair. India appreciates UNCCD efforts toward establishing UNCCD Knowledge Hub to integrate best practices and decision support tools with a stronger focus on solutions and technologies and dissemination of knowledge related to drought, SLM, and other important issues through the UNCCD Knowledge Hub. India has interfaced with agriculture, forest research, and technology institutes for sustainable land management practices. Under SLME program in India, for prevention and control of land degradation by restoration of degraded agriculture and forested land and biomass cover to produce, harvest and utilize biomass in a way to maximize productivity, as well as by carbon sequestration, biodiversity conservation, and sustainable use of natural resources, enhancement of local capacities and institutional building to strengthen land and ecosystem management, facilitation of knowledge dissemination, and application of national and international good practices in SLME within the and across the states and to replicate and upscale of successful land and ecosystem management practices and technologies to maximize synergies with UN Convention on Biological Diversity, climate change, and combating desertification. India is also of view that the post-2020 biodiversity framework for global is to have coherence with the 2020 SDG goals and is also to be linked with Paris Agreement, UNSDG's land degradation neutrality goals, UN strategic plan for forest, and also Ramsar strategic plan. India is happy to inform that India has achieved Aichi target 11 and 16. India is also promoting space technology interventions in addressing the land restoration issues, both in national and international domain. Similarly, India is encouraging satellite-based and online education system for awareness, raising awareness and good deeds for natural resources conservation, land restoration, and indigenous droughts resilient and youth and farmers community. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, India. I invite the delegate from Burkina Faso to take the floor.
But now it's short time because India has been done.
Okay.
Okay. Merci.
Thank you, Chairman. Burkina Faso would like to thank the Secretariat for the synergetic work that has been done jointly with other international institutions. We thank them for creating this database. Notably, we are interested in the drought toolbox. Burkina Faso is an endemic country where we have endemic drought. We have developed our own plan for managing drought challenges. We believe that the implementation of Pillar 2, that is cartography around drought, is of great interest to us because this will allow us to implement our management plan, and why not develop that plan yet further. So we would like to warmly thank the Secretariat for all of their work and look forward and hope to receive assistance in implementing this toolbox. Thank you.
Thank you, Burkina Faso. The IGO, you have requested for the floor. Please state your organization, then we give you the floor. The IGO that has requested for the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Speaking on behalf of IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, I'd like to congratulate the Secretariat, first of all, for the excellent toolbox that's available and the wide array of tools, very useful. I'm particularly happy to see the inclusion of ecosystem-based approaches, such as ecosystem-based adaptation, and this new concept, nature-based solutions. I think this is something that's particularly important if we want to manage land in order to optimize its value and get the best out of land and all the various values that the India delegate referred to. Nature-based solutions is quite a new concept, and a number of our state members have asked us to support in developing some improved standardization and get some clarity on what this concept means. Here we're particularly interested to talk about how nature-based solutions specifically helps to deliver land degradation neutrality. And in the next week, there's going to be a series of regional consultations on the nature-based solutions standards that are under development. 5 of those in 5 world regions. And we're going to organize an ad hoc consultation on the NBS standards here in Delhi, Saturday afternoon in the India Pavilion. I'd like to invite all delegates to come and join us and be particularly interested to get the participation and the advice and points of view of representatives of the parties. Thank you.
I thank you all for your statements, and I now invite the Secretariat to address your comments and questions. Mr. Orr and Mr. Van Dalen, you have the floor.
Okay. Thank you very much for your comments and suggestions. I would like to respond to a few very specific questions asked, but would like to start first with a very warm thank you for all your comments that were provided. I definitely invite everybody to explore this further and feel free to provide further comments and suggestions also through the Knowledge Hub itself. In response to the question I heard from the distinguished delegate from Japan, which was a concern about avoiding duplication in the Knowledge Hub, I would like to say that we do indeed work with a large number of partners, but at the same time we do not intend to duplicate anything, not in the Drought Toolbox nor in the Knowledge Hub. Specifically in regards to the Drought Toolbox, it's a toolbox where we bring together these tools, but we don't literally put them in there in that sense. We provide links where relevant, and only the tools that have been specifically developed for the Drought Toolbox actually are in the Drought Toolbox. So in that sense, we're not duplicating any efforts. We see, for example, that there is similar work done by FAO, who have also developed a Drought Toolbox. This is mostly included in Pillar 1. WMO has a Drought Help Desk, which is directly accessible from the Drought Toolbox. WMO offers a lot of tools that are integrated in Pillar 1. So all the partners contribute to the Drought Toolbox, but we don't duplicate, we simply link there, because we are indeed also very aware of the budget and the limited resources that we have, and we try to maximize that in cooperation with our partners. In response to the question from the distinguished delegates from Cambodia and Algeria, I would like to address those at the same time because I felt that they were related in the sense that they were inquiring about the specific contents of the Drought Toolbox. I don't think this is the right moment to go into too much detail there, but I would definitely invite you to go to the tool that has been developed by UNEP DHI in collaboration with the UNCCD. Once you register there with a password, there will be a long list of all the different data sets that are available. This is all data that is publicly available, so we only provide the data sets that we can get for free from various sources. But we do keep an archive of that data, which makes it unique, and then also provide that archive for free. So in that sense, the way we see that part specifically of the Drought Toolbox, it's not necessarily a complete early warning system, because it would be an impossible task to try to develop an early warning system at a global scale. But we do see that this could be like a Lego starter set that people can start exploring and playing around with and seeing how things fit together. And based on that, then also see what the other needs are. A second tool that I want to point out specifically in that respect as well is, again, WMO, that also have a very useful tool that provides an overview of all the different data sets that are out there, both globally and for a large part also locally. That also provides guidance on which are the data sets that would be useful to use if you're looking into drought monitoring and maybe developing your own early warning system. But when you go into the field of developing an early warning system, that would always need to be done on a local scale, because you can't do that only based on satellite data. There's always other sources that are needed. But the tools and the guides are available in the Drought Toolbox, so I very much invite you to explore that there. Then the question that I heard from, or it wasn't really a question, but what I want to respond to from the distinguished delegate of Argentina. I am indeed aware of all the activities that are also taking place also in relation to WOCAT and other projects. So I would welcome your suggestion to indeed also share these through the Knowledge Hub. In that sense, it's something that I would like to point out also to all parties. We had a system that was included in the UNCCD reporting process where parties are invited to share information about local knowledge sharing systems. This has been completely incorporated into the Knowledge Hub, but we also added a more open part there where we essentially invite any stakeholder who's interested to share information about knowledge sharing systems there. It's not necessarily something that's officially endorsed by the national government, because that can only happen through the formal UNCCD reporting process, but anybody can submit information that they deem relevant for UNCCD stakeholders and have that added there. So I would like to invite everybody to also explore that. And again, if there's anything you would like to share, that is specifically what the Knowledge Hub has been designed to encourage. And then I think my colleague Baron would also like to say a few words. Thank you very much.
Just to follow on to one of the comments made by WOCAT and by, by the honorable delegate from Switzerland, but I think connected to the vision of WOCAT, and by IUCN. I wanted to advise all of you here that a number of representatives of the UNCCD, so some focal points, some people linked to CSOs, some people linked to the SPI, a small team participated in the NAP Expo, the UNFCCC National Adaptation Programs Expo, which is not an official process event, but is meant to be a more speak freely event where the focal points of the UNFCCC, the national authorities of the Green Climate Fund, and many other stakeholders get together and exchange ideas to try to move the agenda forward. And we were invited to create a session that would explore the links between climate change adaptation and the solutions that are associated with the UNCCD. So LDN, sustainable land management, those kinds of things. And it was striking in this meeting overall that in the sessions that all of us attended across the board, I think there were about 8 or 10 of us total, so we spread out, we saw many presentations about ecosystem-based adaptation or nature-based solutions. And when they were talking about land-oriented solutions, most of them were either addressing land degradation or drought, and if you actually looked at the methodologies involved, they were sustainable land management, but very few people used that terminology other than as a generic term, but as a set of techniques. Very few people were using that terminology, and very few people were aware of how central it is to the UNCCD. So upon return, we began to try to explore the decisions, because they were a lot of references to CBD in these sessions. Oh, I also will say we had our own session where we explored these synergies, and I will say 2 things about that. One is that the awareness level was admittedly low, but the relevance and the connectivity between these worlds was very obvious to the participants. And I also will say that there is a mechanical challenge here that should be addressed, which is that many people that are submitting climate change adaptation project proposals are a little bit nervous about referencing LDN, SLM, et cetera, for this fear of double counting. You know, there's a fear of double counting in the carbon world, and it seems to have bled over into whether you can count land degradation work and climate change adaptation work. That's an easy problem for us to solve at both the convention level, maybe also the funding agencies level, and also at the country level. But beyond that, it was very clear that these participants were intrigued that our approach provided so much information at the ground level, like what you were talking about in the WOCAT database. And so the language in this official document about the need for cohesion, it's not about harmonization. That is not at all what has been proposed here. It's simply about cohesion. It's about recognition across these different views that there's a relationship. Or another way to put it, you can right now go online to a nature-based solutions database like Project Drawdown, and you will discover that there is some reference to land, but it's very narrow compared to the way we look at SLM. In other words, we're missing things. We're not maximizing our potential, and so we strongly encourage the move towards cohesion. We're in no way referring to alignment or anything like that. It's just so that we have a common parlance and we promote each other in that world. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Mr. Orr and Mr. Van Dalen. I see no more requests for the floor. The committee has thus concluded its discussion of agenda item 3A. Further discussions will take place in the contact group. I now invite the committee to turn to agenda item 3, interfacing science and policy and sharing knowledge, sub-item 3B, entitled Work Program of the Science Policy Interface for the Biennium 2020 to 2021. I would now like to give the floor to the UNCCD Secretariat to introduce sub-item 3B, for which you have before you document ICCD/COP14/CST/6. Mr. Baron Orr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In line with its mandate, as defined in decisions 23 COP11 and 19 COP12, the Science Policy Interface provides the Committee on Science and Technology with clear and well-defined thematic guidance on scientific knowledge requirements for implementing the UNCCD. According to Decision 19 COP13, the SPI is requested to submit through the Secretariat a proposal for its work program for consideration in each regular CST session, with a focus on 1 or 2 broad, globally relevant priority topics related to desertification, land degradation, and drought. In its meeting between 25 and 27 February 2019, the SPI reviewed potential topics and emerging issues to be considered for inclusion in its Biennium 2020-2021 work program based on needs identified during its work over the course of the Biennium 2018 to 2019, and from other emerging issues identified by the Secretariat and the SPI. These needs and issues were then compared to feedback obtained in a survey of parties and other UNCCD stakeholders conducted from November to December 2018 to help the CST Bureau identify priorities. The SPI also reviewed its current coordination activities with other international scientific panels and bodies dealing with DLDD issues. Based on the identified science policy priorities and the review of coordination activities, the Bureau of the CST, in collaboration with the SPI, developed a draft work program for the SPI for biennium 2020-2021 as contained in this document. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O. I now open the floor.
My apologies, it follows with a presentation. Excuse me. So the presentation is relatively quick. It's just to frame for you the results that I just described or just outlined. So you have in front of you the document CST6 on the work program. At the end of that document, you will see an annex, which is the compiled list of all the proposals for potential objectives for the SPI work program. So these are what the SPI either contributed or received from you or received through feedback from the Secretariat, from direct contact with parties. All of these were part of that meeting that I described, and they were discussed in detail, then brought to a CST Bureau meeting where it was further evaluated and brought down to the following two objectives. But I did want to draw your attention in the document to two paragraphs that might be useful. So obviously, if you look at the annex, you may find recommendations there for the work program that even you may have proposed, right? So these are coming from a wide variety of sources. And it was recognized, first it was pointed out by the SPI, and then the CST Bureau looked closely at the fact that a number of the recommendations could fit or become relevant to a broader proposal. And so I draw your attention for objective 1 to paragraph 9, and you might see there the context that might be considered by the next SPI if this objective was approved by the CST, that might be considered while pursuing that objective. And then you might realize that there could be a relationship between something that's very important in your context, but maybe is not the full wording of the objective. And the idea was here to try and be a little bit more comprehensive where it made sense. This was not forced, this was meant to be logical, but it was done to try to satisfy those concerns. The second objective, it was also done, that's paragraph 11. So that's something for you to consider if you're looking at the objective and you're not seeing something directly worded that maybe was important to your set of considerations. With that said, the conclusions reached by the CST Bureau were, for the first objective, provision of science-based evidence of the potential contribution of integrated land use planning and integrated landscape management to positive transformative change in the context of land degradation neutrality. In the previous session of this plenary, where document CST2 was introduced, it was pointed out to you by the SPI that in the survey, the most commonly requested gap by all of you and other stakeholders in the world of DLDD and land degradation neutrality was this issue that environmental information was not necessarily fully integrated at the planning stage, and that we needed to have a greater understanding of how to link to the planning world. In other words, we're very strong now on addressing management. I'm not saying that more work is not necessary, but it's certainly very strong comparatively, and it was weaker as viewed by you for the world of planning, hence this objective. The deliverables that are listed, and this is, I would draw your attention to table 1, which is on page 7, right-hand column. You will see what you see on the screen, the three deliverables. The first one is the classic model of the SPI, which is a you know that the SPI tends to produce a technical report from which a science policy brief can be developed and the proposals that might come into an official document for your consideration at the next session of the CST. So that's the first deliverable. The third deliverable is a carryover from the last program, which was, I think, quite successful, where you made the recommendation that the SPI have some interface with the global mechanism because of their efforts to help countries mobilize resources in addressing LDN and sustainable land management. So the idea here is to keep that link between their efforts, their guidance, if you will, and the science, so that it's grounded in science. An example of how that was quite effective was the creation of the LDN Transformative Projects and Programs checklist, and a voluntary optional checklist that helps bring together what to do when you're writing a grant proposal for Jeff or other funding where LDN might be incorporated. The middle bullet is unusual. This has not been proposed before in a work program of the SPI. This came from the findings of the survey that indicated that, well, first of all, that in planning processes, as I pointed out before, there tends to be, unless the planning process is specifically defined for agriculture or for conservation, there tends to be inadequate link with environmental data. In other words, another way to put it, municipal planners are not using as much environmental information as you feel might be necessary to be able to optimize the mix of spatial interventions that they are pursued on the landscape. Or another way to put it, as was said in the previous session, doing the right thing in the right place at the right scale. The suggestion was that the tools are part of the problem, that the actual open source scenario-oriented, scenario generation tools that support planners don't have elements in it that make it easy to do trade-offs analysis, to optimize. In other words, look at, if we do this, what does it look like on a map? If we do this set of ideas, what does it look like on a map? Some of those tools exist, but are not necessarily conducive to our needs. So the idea that was proposed by SPI members was to issue an open call that would lead to, this would be only to open source. There's about 7 or 8 very important land use planning scenario generation tools that could potentially create a demonstration of what this might look like. And the idea is, in the open source world, once one of them developed this demonstration, it would be relatively straightforward for others to pick it up. And now we would have a diffusion, if you will, of some functionality in these tools that's more conducive to addressing the needs of this convention. So that's the idea of the middle bullet point. The second objective was very clear in many ways, not only a little bit even in this survey, even though the survey was more about land degradation, desertification, and LDN and SLM, it nevertheless, we received feedback there about the connections to drought and vulnerability. But as I have pointed out in the regional groups, if you actually look at the traffic on our websites, the website is not dominated by drought pages. There's only a small percentage of the website pages, right? Because we haven't been highly focused on drought until you've tasked us with this at the last COP. Some emphasis, but nothing like it is today. And yet, even though there are relatively few pages, the traffic on those pages is higher than anything else. It's very, very high. In addition to that, through the National Drought Planning exercise, both through, as you may have seen in the Creek document, that is addressing the policy framework on drought and that planning effort, and from your feedback, it's become clear that the assessment of resilience and vulnerability of populations and ecosystems to drought is not straightforward. There are many tools. It's a little bit, which one should I use, what, etc. It's at this stage that could be improved. It could be brought together if we did an assessment of what's out there, maybe analogous to the assessment that was done for what they called the drought smart land management practices. In other words, trying to make this more along the lines of what you're used to with SLM, so that it's easier to choose what to do under what circumstances. This, of course, would address the new strategic objective and a variety of other aspects of drought in your past COP decisions. And then the deliverable, once again, would be the traditional model of the SPI, where a technical report would be produced that pulls together from any other assessments that have been done, and if other information is required, that information, in order for you to be in a better position to go forward with whatever you might be pursuing. And this would obviously include recommendations that you have made, that we've heard in the previous sessions of the CST, where you've talked about how you are pursuing vulnerability assessment in a number of countries. In addition to this, we have the proposed coordination activities. I won't provide a lot of detail here. It's relatively straightforward, because most of these build upon past coordination activities. And you may have understood from the document that there was an effort based on a decision of the COP that we try to make more formal the interaction between the SPI and these various coordination activities that you see on the screen, with the exception of the one on the bottom. I will talk about that in a moment, the IDMP. That's not currently a coordination activity. But obviously that decision also says, with full respect to the procedures of these other bodies. Obviously, we're not trying to do something outside of their procedures. The one that we were most successful with, in fact, it was the one that was of the greatest concern expressed by you, was IPBES, where we now have a memorandum of cooperation between the UNCCD and IPBES, something that was done by the other by the biodiversity conventions, as they call themselves, 4 years ago. So it's a very big achievement, and I will say that it has led to a much more fluid back and forth between the UNCCD and IPBES. With IPCC, we received strong encouragement in terms of the contributions to scientific review. We did it collectively, and it led to, as you heard in the other session, very strong emphasis on UNCCD priorities in the summary for policymakers of the final product. I won't go as much detail into the other ones, because Mariam went through those from the SPI in the last session. I will conclude with because we have a strategic objective on drought, the SPI recognized that none of the current 6 coordination activities, one she didn't go over in the yesterday was the Global Land Outlook. The reason she didn't is that it wasn't a year where the SPI was as engaged as they were in the previous COP. In the previous COP, it was the first edition of the Global Land Outlook, and the SPI played a significant role in both contributing some information, some working papers, and the SPI did significant scientific review on major portions of the GLO. In the interim, this biennium, it was more about serving on the steering committee, where the scoping of what we might call GLO2 has been initiated, and there is an effort to have a similar relationship, perhaps an even stronger relationship in the scientific assessment of the GLO. And then the IDMP, that is the program that FAO, WMO, actually I should start it the other way. I think WMO got it off the ground to their credit. WMO, FAO, and the Global Water Partnership, which brings both of them and a number of other partners together, created this umbrella of integrated drought management program. And that program has been very engaged in the supporting efforts on the national drought planning that was discussed in a document in the Creek, but they also were significant in the SPI efforts advising us on CST/3, which you discussed yesterday, and keeping us up to date on the WMO efforts to work with countries to move towards national commonality in their approach to a drought indicator that could be therefore a global drought indicator. Hence, the SPI recommends a coordination activity, and IDMP was enthusiastic. You will see what they propose, which was agreed by the SPI, is what the specifics of that might be inside this document. These are in Table 2, which is on, excuse me, is that right? Yes, Table 2 on page 9 of this document. Oh, back up one slide. Oh, this is not the right presentation. I apologize. So I wanted you to know that at 1 p.m. today in Met 11, which is the Rio Convention's pavilion, coordinating lead authors of the IPBES Global Assessment Report, which was released in May, the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land, which was released in August, the International Resource Panel, which released these think piece on SDGs and restoration here, I think it's actually today, the World Atlas of Desertification, which actually was what was cited for many of the global data that were captured in the IPBES and IPCC assessments. All of them will be participating in a session in the pavilion during the lunch hour, which will be closed by the Group on Earth Observations, which is a multilateral approach towards integrating Earth observation data, and their current model is knowledge hub based, which is familiar to this group, hence we asked them to pull it together. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O. I now open the floor for any questions or comments that you may have on the presentation by the Secretariat. I will take all comments and then give the floor to the Secretariat to respond. Delegates wishing to take the floor are invited to press the button. I give the floor to the distinguished delegate from South Africa.
Thank you, Chair. I may have missed it, or I may not have been listening quite attentively, but I missed a very important objective on capacity building, both institutional and human capacity building in the work program. And I would like to hear more about that, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Niger, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you very, very much, Chair. Niger is going to speak on behalf of the African group. Chair, the African group appreciate the significant efforts of the UNCCD Secretariat and the CST to the document on the program of work for the biennium 2020-2021, and the proposed deliverables concluded that the document largely meets the requirements and mandate provided under Decision 19/COP13. The SPI is required to submit through the Secretariat a proposal for its work program for consideration at each regular CST session, with a focus on one or two broad globally relevant priority topics related to desertification, land degradation, and drought. The group, however, proposed for adoption of the following recommendation. The group seeks to bring further clarity in the deliverable under work program objective 2 relating to global mechanism, and proposes an amendment to the formulation of the deliverables as follows. A provision of scientific and technical guidelines to support country parties in formulating their transformative projects and programs for funding through the global mechanism and other funding agencies. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Niger, for that proposal. Yes, Switzerland, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. For Switzerland, the objectives and the deliverables of the SPI work program should be coherent with the scope of the convention. In particular, the language regarding the objective 1 should be reviewed. The objective should not only mention land degradation, but DLDD and LDN. In general, all objectives, deliverable and activities should be amended accordingly. Further point regarding objective 1, we support the review, the scientific review of the feasibility, implications and impacts of inducing land use change on 700 million hectares in semi-arid and semi-humid areas and the populations concerned. The SPI should appraise these findings of the IPCC in the light of the experiences with combating desertification, land degradation, and promoting SLM in desertification affected areas or areas threatened by desertification. Another point, Switzerland would like to recommend further clarifying the specific scope and objective of the GLO report in order to avoid any potential overlaps with other global assessments. In order to enhance the quality and relevance of the report, we suggest that scientific networks dealing with land issues are involved early in the process. For instance, the Global Land Program of the Future Earth. Switzerland also supports the coordination activities of the SPI as mentioned in the document. Regarding the annex, we have a comment or a question. If this list will be integral part of the decisions, we are of the opinion that the list should be further shortened to focus even more on the priorities within the scope of the convention and not exclusively on LDN or voluntary LDN targets. We would offer suggestion to shorten the following points. Topic B, provision of scientific evidence of the pivotal role of soil carbon for the achievement of multiple benefits in the context of LDN. we raised the question whether this is really the role of the SPI. Should this not be done by scientific networks who are already working on it, where of course the SPI can contribute? We do not recommend this as a priority. And finally, topics E to H, we also would not recommend as a priority. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Switzerland. Sudan, you have the floor.
شكرا سيد الرئيس وشكرا.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank you, the SPI, for the praiseworthy efforts made and also for the work program for the biennium 2020-2021. As far as cooperation with other bodies is concerned, I would like to state that we do not see any coordination with the United Nations body responsible for disaster risk reduction. That is an organization which is specialized in the management of disasters and has an impact and does affect the scope of work because it does include desertification amongst some of its activities, as well as dust and sandstorms and the management of arid land. What is the reason? Is it because that body does not have a program relating to the management of arid land and desertification? Would that be the reason for it? Thank you.
Thank you, Sudan. I see no more requests, and therefore I wish to thank you most sincerely for your comments and questions. I now invite the Secretariat to address your comments and questions. Mr. Orr, you have the floor.
Thank you for those excellent questions and comments. I would start with the question raised by the Honorable Delegate from South Africa. The general division of labor, if you will, for within the Secretariat, and also I think through guidance from the COP, places capacity building as something that is cutting across all aspects of the work of the Secretariat, but it does have a centralized hub, and it does have its independent decision from COP13, and therefore there is a document that was reviewed in the CRIC that's specifically focused on capacity building. The bridge between the work of the SPI and that is primarily through the Knowledge Hub. So one reason that the document that was presented a few moments ago, CST5, begins with the modalities of the SPI, runs through the Knowledge Hub, and leads to best practices is that theme. So the Knowledge Hub, for example, it took all the products of the SPI, and this was also coming from recommendations, not decisions from you, but just general recommendations, feedback from you, different countries that said, can you make some of these technical reports more interactive, more accessible online? Can you make the work of the SPI more dynamically accessible? And then that then bridges to tools that are central to the capacity building efforts of the Secretariat, such as the capacity building marketplace, which allows all of you, for any event, any work that's going on in your countries, any scientific conference, any practical things that you feel need to be brought to broader attention, it's a tool that makes it very easy for you to place that and basically have it communicated, advertised even online. So in addition, that in the middle of the Knowledge Hub is the link the other direction to best practices, which was discussed a moment ago, the strong relationship with WOCAT and the SLM database, that kind of thing. So it is true that there is not a capacity building objective inside of the SPI, but it's not because it's been ignored, it's because it's been tasked in a different way. In the case of in the comment that was made on behalf of the Africa group by the honorable delegate from Niger, we have noted the recommendation that you've made, and I think you're in the contact group. It would be very helpful if you could send the text to us by email so that we can make sure that we make sure that this is considered. If this is indeed a alternative objective, that would be very important, but certainly it will help in the discussions. If it does seem, the way that it was written, that there might be a way to link this to what's there as well, so that could be discussed in the contact group. In the comments that were made by the honorable delegate from Switzerland, the comment made that the objectives should be crafted within the scope of the convention, specifically emphasizing the need to include DLDD. There definitely is no objection to that from the SPI. It was simply not something that they wrote, but it certainly could be added to that if it was the views of the contact group to do that. If I've understood the requests made by Switzerland about appraising the IPCC report, this was discussed in detail, the IPCC Special Report on Climate Change and Land. This was discussed in detail by the SPI when proposing the coordination activity, particularly those that are directly familiar with the IPCC process. You realize that we're in a great position because this report was just released, but we're in a timing position, something that's difficult because it was released too late to be analyzed by the SPI and turned into a set of recommendations. It's not a simple thing, as you heard from the member of the SPI yesterday, to go through that type of analysis. So what the SPI proposed instead was to invite the IPCC to come to the COP, which we have done. They're both going to be present in the high-level segment on the roundtable of land, climate, and renewable energy. That will be the chair of the IPCC. And they already gave a session this morning in the Science Day, the SPI Science Day. They led the Science Day, so they had 4 or 5 people that gave presentations. They, as I mentioned before, will be present in the assessments segment, which starts at 1 p.m. in Met 11. The idea being to provide you insights now to what's there. I realize that's not the suggestion made by Switzerland, however, because that doesn't immediately enter your process. However, there was an agreement made that at minimum the key messages that come out of the Science Day could at least be shared as a piece of information, a fact sheet if you will, in the ministerial segment and in the ministerial luncheon, which is also related to this issue. So at least the relevance, the timeliness of this report would be at the attention of your ministers right now. But then the issue, the process issue that I think was the primary focus of the recommendation made by the Honorable Delegate of Switzerland, you may know that you did in the last SPI program recommend a similar review of AR6, the 6th assessment report. And you may also know that, and I apologize, if I may get the absolute specific procedures off here because I'm not an expert in IPCC processes, But from discussions with the IPCC, my understanding is that the coordinators of the working groups, the 3 working groups, and then the coordinating lead authors are asked to, in a sense, update, but primarily make sure that everything that happens in AR6 builds upon the most recent special reports, such as the special report on 1.5 degrees, the one on land and climate change that we're talking about here, the one on oceans, etc. So because we also have commonality between SPI members and the AR6, discussions went on about whether we should focus our SPI energies on reviewing that, because it will be in process, right? We will be giving scientific review comments there at 2 of the working groups are highly relevant to the UNCCD. So the decision was made to put that in the work program. However, if you feel that, and the reasoning being, in 2 years' time, the special report will not be as up to date as the AR6 report. So that was the reasoning. But if you feel that that should be amended, it is not objected to in any way by the SPI. They were trying to make a pragmatic decision that flowed with the cycle and your needs. I apologize if it's not clear in the document, but the tradition in the past of this document is to provide an annex which lets you see all proposals that have been received for candidate topics of the work program. And so what you see in the annex is not the work program. It is not part of what will be considered in the contact group. It's for information, because you may have wanted to know what happened to my recommendation about ABC. Hopefully you will find it in that list. So when you mentioned your specific example about soil organic carbon, there's no question that a number of countries proposed more work on soil organic carbon. But the SPI felt strongly that the last 2 work programs had an emphasis on soil organic carbon, and the dearth of knowledge related to the planning level was viewed so high in the survey, they elected to move the focus there. When you only can have 2 objectives, you have to make some tough decisions, and that was the decision that was made. So actually what you recommended, the delegate from Switzerland, is in line with what was concluded by the SPI. That will not be part of the work program as proposed, at least. So the comment made by the honorable delegate from Sudan or South Sudan? The question was raised about the relationship between the SPI and the body UNDRR, right? The disaster relief body. There's several elements to this. So the coordination activities, the COP mandate decision, the first one for the SPI, calls these scientific mechanisms. In many other decisions, they're called intergovernmental bodies and panels. This is not where the SPI interfaces with UN agencies. The opportunity to interface with agencies is an open call that's made every 4 years, if I've got the cycle correct, to the all potential or current observer organizations, current observer organizations, which includes that entity, with the option of putting in a proposal to serve as an observer on the SPI. We did not receive a proposal from UNDRR, so that didn't happen, but it could happen. In other words, if there was a need and you have strong relationship with that body, we can begin those discussions and explore this. And I'm sure if they had more familiarity with the UNCCD, it's more likely that they would consider submitting a proposal. but please keep in mind it is a competitive process, so it's based on the relationship between all the other proposals to determine what would be most relevant. I also will add, however, and I would have to seek clarification from WMO, but I'm fairly sure that UNDRR participates in the IDMP, or they certainly could participate in that, and that would be another mechanism that they could interface with the SPI more directly. So that's a possibility there. And that concludes my response to the comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Orr. I see no more requests for the floor. The committee has thus concluded its discussion of agenda item 3B. Further discussions will take place in the contact group. I now invite the committee to turn to agenda item 4, procedural matters. Program of work for the 15th session of the Committee on Science and Technology. It is my understanding that one draft decision is anticipated under this item, which will be taken up in the CST contact group this afternoon, in order to enable the committee to take action on it tomorrow afternoon. I now open the floor for brief comments on this sub-item. I see no request for the floor. The committee has thus concluded its discussion of agenda item 4. I now invite the secretary to give some announcements.
Thank you, Chair. We would like to inform delegates that the final CST plenary is tomorrow, 6th of September, tentatively scheduled at 3 p.m. in the plenary hall. Delegates are invited to check the daily journal of tomorrow and the electronic screens within the conference center for any updates with regard to exact timing of the final CST plenary and the meetings of the CST contact group. Also, we would like to remind delegates that the meeting of the CST contact group will take place in Met 18 immediately after the adjournment of this meeting. Thank you.
In view of this announcement, this meeting is adjourned.